Good afternoon, everyone. I would love it if somebody could put in the chat whether or not you can hear me right now. That is the best way for me to know that my audio is working. I see that it is. Wonderful. Thank you, Shelby. I really appreciate that. Welcome to the webinar today, everybody. I'm Sierra, and I'm your host, and you have arrived at webinar number 9, Sex and Sensibility, Disability, Sexuality, and Available Adaptations with Em and Skye, who you will meet in just a moment. We are happy to bring you this webinar on behalf of the Indiana Abuse Prevention Disability Task Force, along with MESA and ICADV. And I am Sierra, I am your host, and this is just a picture of me. That's fine, we can move on from that. Before I go ahead and turn over the floor so we can get started, I just want to talk to you a little bit about what accessibility options and some sort of housekeeping things that are available to you. We are using webcams today, which means that you have the opportunity to not only view the PowerPoint that was prepared, but you can also look at the speakers as they talk. I am going to turn off my webcam when I turn over the floor to Skye and Em, but I want to let you know that you have the option to turn on and off the webcams if it is distracting to you. So you can watch everyone or you can watch no one. In terms of access for folks who may be deaf or hard of hearing, we are using live closed captioning, and I want to say thank you so much to Gay Cordoba, who has been our captioner through the last several webinars that we've offered this year. And Gay, you are so appreciated. So one of the issues with that is that I'm going to go to the next slide and show you the URL. It is also in the text chat, and you should just be able to click the URL in your text chat and a new window will pop up where you can read the words as they are said. Unfortunately, GoToWebinar is not compatible with accessibility, so this is our fix. You just have to have several windows open. Another thing that we have found that is helpful for people is we have given you the slide deck. It is in the handouts section of your webinar platform dashboard thing. If you just kind of click around in the software that the webinar pops up when you log in, you should be able to figure out how to see the webcams, how to take a look and download the handouts. And I wonder if I'm forgetting something else. Oh, sound. If you are having trouble hearing, one of the best recommendations that we have is for you to turn off the speakers in your whatever device you're using and call in using a telephone. And that way the audio won't lag for you, even if something does happen to the sound through the internet. You will get a copy of this video and the slides and any other resources that are recommended to you through this video. We will email those to you. We are going to ask you to do an evaluation after this webinar. And I prepared an FAQ handout for you, and I believe that's everything. Okay. I want to encourage people again to use the option of live streaming, and I am going to go ahead and mute myself. Turn over.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for taking a break from watching the drama with the Royals to join us in a conversation about safer sex and accessible sexuality. I am one of the people who has helped organize this webinar series. My name is Skye Ashton Kantola, and I've been doing sex education for almost 10 years. Can you go to the next slide?
Hi, I'm going to be helping, I guess, co-present this presentation. I'm a student at IU, and I do a lot of really awesome work with sex research through the Kinsey Institute and a lot of different activism with disability and queerness and sexuality.
Yeah, so the outline we have today is to spend some time talking about accessibility and devices and options for making sex accessible for a variety of abilities and bodies. And then we'll have a section talking about communication. Thanks. Talking about communication, consent, and sexuality, and then we will close talking about apps and technology and resources that exist to include people with disabilities, queer, trans, and intersex folks, and other folks who are often left out of safer sex and healthy sexuality discussions, how sex is and can be accessible for folks from wherever they're coming from. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions, if folks would like to ask questions.
Okay, so this is a super, super broad question that we decided to start out with because we're talking about sex as kind of a core part of our conversation today. So as far as general pop culture, we have a really good idea of like what sex might be or what sex might look like. That is a very, very narrow definition of sex. Most people think penis and vagina or
Sierra, can you go to the next slide?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Or other really basic things like that. But we wanted to be very clear that when we're talking about sex, we aren't just talking about orgasms or penis and vagina or PIV sex. It could be one person or two person people or multiple people. It doesn't necessarily involve love. And it's not for everybody. We have a lot of really, really amazing ace folks in the queer community, and it's not necessarily something everyone has to do. But we want to emphasize to be yourself, make sure that everyone involved is consenting and having fun, and just do things that feel right and comfortable for you. Okay, so disabled folks use accommodations and aids in a lot of areas of our lives, or at least some people do. But as far as sex goes, a lot of people don't really think about what kinds of accommodations and aids they can use. It's usually a conversation of, well, I can have sex or I can't have sex. But sex toys are a really, really awesome form of accommodation that people with disabilities can use to make sex easier. And they come in a lot more variations than most folks think. There are a lot out there, and it might take a lot of trying or a lot of different conversations. If you're lucky enough to live in a larger city like Indianapolis or especially Chicago or some of the cities on the East Coast, there are some really amazing feminist sex toy shops that you can actually go into, and a lot of them are incredibly disability friendly, and the staff there are willing to sit down and have a conversation with you and let you try different things out, especially if you have things like skin sensitivities or sensory sensitivities. They'll let you feel the toys with your hands to see, hey, am I gonna have a reaction with this? Is this gonna be a good fit for me? Rather than spending a couple $100 on toys that you might absolutely hate.
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
So there's also a bullet point about how sometimes assistive devices or aids or even sex toys can be part of somebody's body. So that means that if your partner is somebody who has disabilities, to realize that maybe to you, they are somebody who uses a wheelchair, but for them, that wheelchair also they might consider that part of their body and really want to incorporate that in a really particular way in their sex life as well. So it's important, for some people, maybe different toys or assistive devices are just an assistive device or a toy that someone is incorporating into their sexuality, but other people might perceive those items to actually be a part of their body that they want to engage with in a really particular way. So it's important to have conversations about that. Whether or not you're somebody with a disability, everyone wants to talk about how they want to incorporate their body into different types of sex. And in a similar way, if somebody is also using a mobility device, or maybe if they have like a dildo or something, like different people have different relationships to assistive devices or toys like that.
Okay, so This was a super interesting thing that I came across when I was researching a very, very similar presentation that I gave a couple of months ago. I'm absolutely horrible at pronouncing things. Mr. Duncan was a super awesome disability activist who is also an inventor. He has a lot of really cool other adaptive equipment that he created for himself because there just wasn't a lot out there for what he was looking for in the 70s. And he created the first line of silicone dildos. He was someone who was a paraplegic and was really frustrated at the lack of body-safe options for sex toys that were out there. So he went ahead and created a whole bunch of different options of sex toys. If you go and research him, you can see some of his really early prototypes that are a lot of fun to just look at and see how sex toys were designed by disabled people for disabled people, or people with disabilities, depending on the language that you use. I use identity first, so that is generally what I'm going to use just because it is what I'm most comfortable with.
Do you want to give just quick
description? Yeah, sorry. I'm still adapting to giving image descriptions. So there's an image in the bottom right corner that's a picture of a dildo that has a hand strap across an individual's palm. So the dildo slides over an individual's finger and straps in around the palm. So you don't have to have the dexterity to be able to necessarily hold it if you don't want or have the ability to. Right, so positioning wedges are something that you will see sometimes in PT or occupational therapy, if that's something that you're used to, but they can actually be a super, super helpful aid as far as sex. So we have in the bottom left corner is the fascinator pillow, which is just a pillow wedge that has a waterproof cover, zip cover over it. It is marketed for people with disabilities. One of the really interesting tidbits about this, you can buy a wedge pillow on Amazon for about 20 bucks and get the fascinator cover. And it is substantially cheaper than buying the entire fascinator pillow from their website because people with disabilities are charged exponentially more for exactly the same things. So if you're looking for a wedge pillow, there are some really great ones on Amazon, and just throw a water resistant blanket over it or buy the fascinator cover. The image on the right side is an example of some sort of positioning device. It has some metal bars that will help hold you up in the air, and then some like wide elastic bands that are strong enough to be able to carry somebody's weight. This gives you the option to be able to hold your body on top of your partner or position yourself in ways that you would not be able to if you're not able to have a ton of lower body strength or mobility. Okay, these are some really awesome ones that do not have cheap DIY options, unfortunately. So on the left side, we have our Liberator mount. It is a pillow that is designed to hold a magic wand. Magic wands are body massagers. I'm going to put that in quotations. They're originally designed as body massagers, but they're pretty widely known as a sex toy or a vibrator. The Liberator mount has a slide slot that you can slide the magic wand into so you don't have to hold it. You can then lay on it or grind on it or whatever you are into. And then the Intimates Brighter chair, which is the image we have on the right, is a chair that it kind of looks like a camping chair, and it can go pretty much every direction as far as both the legs on the bottom and the ankle back and forth. It was designed from someone with a C6-7 quadriplegic to give him more options as far as what positions he could get his body in because of his frustration around his limitation of movement. Okay, harnesses. Harnesses are one of the more common, I guess, sex toys as far as if you ask people what they know about. But they can actually be a super, super great accommodation for people who either don't have attached penetrative parts or just don't have mobility or want to use those. There are actually a lot more types of harnesses than you might originally think. So the traditional harness that you think about is the one that goes around your waist and would attach like an Audi normally would. We have two different options of really great harnesses here. The one on the far left is a hand harness that straps around your hand, kind of like a wheelchair glove or a fingerless glove would. And you can then attach the dildo to the palm of that. The one in the middle is a thigh piece that wraps around the thigh with Velcro. And you can slide the dildo then into that. And then the third one that we have is a support strap, which you can attach to various hard points or just have your partner use in general to be able to hold different parts of your body or support different parts of your body if you aren't able to independently hold your body up or aren't comfortable holding your body up for long periods of time. And we have some really, really awesome hands-free options because a lot of the options that we've shown you so far require the use of your hands, which is not doable or comfortable for everybody. So here on the far left, I am not remembering the name of that, so we will have to throw that in the notes. This was one that was created by someone who had limited mobility. That piece in the middle straps around your waist on a belt-like piece, and then the other two toys shown off to the side, the one on the left is a vibrator that can be used to penetrate, and the one on the right is a sleeve that can then go over your body. It attaches to the part on your belt, and those move independently both in and out and vibrating, which is really great if you have limited mobility there. The one on the top in the middle, I'm not remembering the name of this one either.
There's actually, they're in the notes.
Okay.
Sierra, do you mind telling us really quick?
Thank you.
Which, sorry.
Okay, so the image one, which is the
Sex Machine by Humpus.
Sex Machine by Humpus is
Black box
this.
with
Black box on the
buttons.
left.
Yes.
Okay. And then Pulsator by Fun Factory. That
Is the far right.
okay. And then Pulse 3, solo shaped like a rounded triangle curve. That. Pulse 3.
Yeah.
And Blue Mouth Guard.
So underneath the, or I guess the Pulse Fun, which is the one on the top, is a vibrating piece that can go over an Audi and then vibrates. It stays stationary, so it's different than the one that you see on the left. But it does still vibrate, and it is still a really great hands-free option for folks with Audis. Underneath that, you have a vibrating mouth guard, which you can put in your mouth or have your partner place in your mouth, and then has a bullet vibrator on the front of it. And then the one on the far right is another Fun Factory toy. That's an independently thrusting dildo. So you can see the ridges along there. You would be able to have it placed close to you or in you, and then it independently thrusts and vibrates unlike most other vibrators. So I'm queer, and this is a really, really important part for me to mention. Queer sex is centered on creativity and communication and kind of breaking down everything that we are taught in basic sex ed, because there isn't, at least where I live, comprehensive sex ed in general, let alone any sort of queer sex ed. So going into sex as folks from marginalized communities who aren't often represented in sex ed, it's important to throw out any ideas that you've gotten from dominant culture because they aren't designed or made for us. So your sex does not have to look like the sex that you see on TV or in porn or that your friends are having, because it's what you want it to be. And as long as you're getting what you want out of the experience, then that's the most important thing.
Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time now talking about communication and consent and sexuality. So do you want to start us off?
Sure. So there are a lot of conversations happening right now in pop culture about talking about sex. Most of them are centered on having conversations with your partner or partners about sex, which is a really, really awesome place to start. But for people with disabilities, this is a lot more of a complex thing, and we might have to have a lot more discussions than our able-bodied peers would have to have. So some really great people to be thinking about as far as people you might want to talk to about sex would be your partner or partners, Your medical providers are a really, really important part of these discussions. Your caregivers or PCAs, if that is a resource that you utilize. Your teachers, especially for parents with disabilities, this is an important conversation that you might have. And then anyone else who's in your life that you think needs to be a part of these conversations should be a part of the conversation. And just going back to clarify, PCA is personal care attendant. So anyone who is coming into your home or working with you on a day-to-day basis to make sure that your wants and needs are met. Part of that, if you want sex to be a part of your day-to-day routine, it is a part of their job to make sure that that is a thing that is happening for you.
Sure. Yeah, so consent is obviously a necessary part of sexuality. So consent meaning that everyone is informed about their own desires and their own boundaries, and possibly the desires and boundaries of other folks who are going to be in the sexual experience with you. A lot of times consent can be also a really attractive and or like sexy part of sexual experiences. And like I said, it's necessary and required. Talking about sex and also understanding our own desires and boundaries can be a really important and often overlooked part of sexuality education, which is why we wanted to spend a considerable amount of time going over that today. It's also important that a lot of times we talk about consent as in what does everybody want, but it's also important to talk about what people don't want in a particular sexual experience or in their sexuality generally. And we're going to show you some of the ways that these conversations can also be really fun and interesting to go through for yourself or with partners.
So for a lot of folks, at least locally that I've talked to, talking about sex might not have been a part of your relationships in the past, especially if this isn't something that you're particularly used to. It's not at all too late to bring it up. You could go home today and be like, hey, I saw this really cool webinar about sex and talking about sex. Do you want to have a conversation? And bringing it up that way. So it's not anything that has to be this big, like, sit down, we have to talk about sex type thing. That actually might scare your partners. If you want to do that, then you can go right ahead and play ominous music, but that is not necessarily the approach I would take. It's important to have these conversations with your partners about what you like and what you don't like and your needs and your wants and what accessibility around sex looks like for you. So we have a list of different things that you might want to bring up. Really important stuff would be things like testing status and what barriers you want to use, as well as things like some sort of communication system with your partner, like the red, yellow, green light, where you can communicate with them, hey, red, I need to stop really quickly without having to have a conversation about it. And there are a lot of really great ways to bring this up as a whole conversation or just as a little point of like, we're having sex, hey, I really love it when you do this, can you do that more? So it doesn't even necessarily have to be this huge conversation. It can just be these little points that you throw in here and there if a conversation isn't something that you're in a spot for right now.
So there are some specifically unique considerations for safer sex that I often think gets left out of conversations when we're talking about sex for and with people with disabilities. So first off, I want to just define what safer sex means. Safer sex means being fully informed about risks and the magnitude of risks or the likelihood of risks, and that the person can make informed choices about the acceptable level of risk for them. So if there's a risk for pregnancy, or if there's a risk for STI transmission, or just general like disease transmission, because some of us have compromised immune systems. All of those types of things, like being informed about risks associated with different kinds of sex, and also being able to make choices about, oh yeah, I feel comfortable with this level of risk or this kind of risk. One thing that often is left out of safer sex conversations is there's almost this implicit assumption that if the person is with a monogamous or closed partner, that they suddenly don't have to practice safer sex ever. And that's really unfortunate because probably any number of us on this webinar have had the flu. So sometimes our health and circumstances change. And so it's really important to kind of reassess what possible health consequences you might have when experiencing sex, even if you're married or you and a partner are monogamous. Sorry, I'm slowing down. If you're in a monogamous relationship, or if you're in a closed relationship, meaning you do not have multiple partners, it's still important to check in with each other and see if one of you could get like the flu from the other person or something else like that. One way to reduce the possibility of getting some type of contagious illness from the other person is to make sure that you're using different barrier methods. So this could include using nitrile or latex gloves. A lot of people might get an allergy to latex, which is why nitrile is awesome. Nitrile and latex gloves in particular are thinner, and usually if you're using gloves like on your hands, there might be more sensation. These are often also single-use items, but you can also get thicker latex or rubber gloves. Sometimes, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but sometimes people might have a latex or rubber fetish or kink. And so these might result in less sensation, but like between the individuals using it, but maybe you like the sensation of rubber or thicker latex more. And also, a lot of times those types of gloves can be used repeatedly as long as you are appropriately cleaning them between uses. Another thing to think about is making sure that whenever you are using different types of devices or sex toys, that it's a good practice to cover them even if you have the same partner. So for example, if you're using a dildo and you're with your partner of 5 years and you know neither of you is having sex or hooking up with other people, it's still a good practice to use a condom on the dildo before you put it into use, and then always making sure that you're washing it after every use, as well as maybe washing it between individuals using it, and also washing it maybe if you're going to use the same toy for different types of insertive reasons.
I also wanted to add with that, if you have medical grade silicone toys, you can boil them. Don't do it if you have a motor in your toy, it will murder your toy. But like pure silicone, butt plugs and dildos and things like that can be boiled, which does totally sterilize them.
Yes, thank you. There's also a lot of misinformation about when plastic wrap or like cellophane wrap can be used for sexual purposes. And the answer is, it is not a super simple question to answer. And so instead, for the sake of time, we've included a link that breaks down how different types of plastic wrap are made and which ones are safe to use in different situations. So please refer to that. They did a really good job explaining why there's confusion and what the real answer is to which types of plastic wrap can be used. I think this is important, especially for accessibility, because what if you want to put like plastic wrap on your wheelchair because maybe condoms don't fit your wheelchair? There's a lot of different uses that plastic wrap might have for accessibility in sex that people may not have thought about, but it's really important to make sure that you're using plastic wrap that is actually appropriate and safe to use for sex.
Another great thing for things like covering your wheelchair, being water resistant, is passenger blankets, which are totally water fluid resistant. You can dump a cup of water on them and it's going to stay in your blanket there. They're on the expensive end again, because why would we make anything affordable? Amazon has water resistant pet blankets that are not as large but work almost as well. I hate Amazon as a corporation, but really great sex stuff sometimes.
So Em started to mention this earlier, but I wanted to make sure that we delved into it a little bit more. So setting boundaries, there can be a lot of specificity to setting boundaries that sometimes people don't think about. So I wanted to break this down into a few different areas and options that you can explore for yourself. A lot of this language has come from kinky communities, so KINKY. I did not come up with these ideas, but there's a lot of people who come up with really cool ideas around boundary setting that I am borrowing from. Hard boundaries mean things that are necessary for you to have fulfilling sex, as well as things that you absolutely do not want to experience. Those are hard boundaries. If that might be specific positions that you really are not comfortable in, specific sensations, maybe for some neurodivergent people, for example, the feeling of rubber might be really upsetting. So you just know you do not want to have rubber items in your sexual activity. Certain interactions, maybe you absolutely know that you do not want to ever play a dominant role during sexual activity. Or certain words or actions that you may or may not be comfortable, like that you're specifically not comfortable or you strongly desire in sexual experiences. So those are hard boundaries. And then soft boundaries are situations where that there's room for exploration with people that you trust and feel comfortable with. So soft boundaries, you might talk with a partner and say, I don't usually like to be an insertive partner, so somebody who puts their body or genitals into the other partner, but I'm curious to try this out with you because I feel safe with you. Can we try it out and make sure we have words or behavior set up in advance to talk about if I suddenly become uncomfortable? Those are soft boundaries. And it's important to realize that soft boundaries might change based on the context. Maybe you are interested in exploring a particular position or sensation or kink or fetish with one partner, but you don't feel the same way about doing it with a different partner. Or maybe this particular day your health is doing great, and so you're ready to be more exploratory in sex. Whereas another day maybe you aren't feeling so well, so you don't want to. You want to still have sexual activity, but you are not in a position where you feel like being exploratory is going to be helpful for you that day. So those are hard and soft boundaries, and we'll give you some resources you can use to kind of explore and write those things down for yourself or talk about that with partners. A few other things to think about in terms of boundaries is making sure, like, does your partner or partners, do they understand your hard and soft boundaries? And in order to talk to a partner about that, you probably want to be pretty aware for yourself of what your hard and soft boundaries are. That seems really logical, but I would say like 90% of the time when I'm talking to people about safer sex, they have never sought to think about what are the things that I absolutely don't want to happen, what are the things I love when they happen, and what things am I willing and interested to explore with partners. Just answering those three questions is so difficult for so many people. So taking time to figure that out for yourself, and maybe you want to figure it out with partners, that's totally fine, but making sure that you're actually taking time to communicate with yourself and also with prospective partners about those kinds of boundaries and desires. And then once you understand yourself and you've been able to communicate this with prospective partners, also finding out, do you feel like you know your partner's boundaries and desires as well? And then a lot of times people will say making sure you have like a safe word, which means a word that you can say where all sexual activity stops or a specific type of sexual activity stops. This can be verbal or nonverbal. Maybe you know that if you get really overstimulated, you're not really able to speak anymore, but you still want to convey, oh, I want to stop what we're doing now so I can get less overstimulated. So maybe there's a specific movement like waving your hand or closing your eyes or something like that that you can convey to your partner to let them know, hey, we need to stop this right now. And then lastly, like I mentioned before, having an actual discussion about what do your assistive devices or toys mean to you. For example, I have worked with lots of trans people who might have a specific toy they consider part of their body, and so they don't want their partner using it when it's not attached to them or that they're not in control of it, right? Or there's lots of other people who might think, oh, all of these toys are just toys, we can all use them however we feel like. So just actually having that discussion and figuring out like, what do those types of devices or toys mean to people, and how do people prefer or really want them to be used in different sexual situations? Do you have other thoughts? I keep thinking I can switch the slide. Okay. Okay, so we talked a lot about boundaries, and so now I want to take a minute to talk also about desires. So first off, there is probably the best sexual inventory that I've ever seen anyone publish is through a website called Scarletine, which is a really cool, oh, something just changed.
It did? Where?
Our screen went full screen. We can't see the PowerPoint.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I made you the presenter so you could.
Oh, okay. You continue moderating. It's totally fine.
Can you see better now?
Nope.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll put it back.
Sorry, y'all. 1 second.
Oh, we lost our PowerPoint. I
think you have to get it back to me. Sorry, Skye.
Okay, give control.
We're coming back, y'all.
Okay, I just set it to make you the presenter again.
Okay. Are we back?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I'm not gonna mess with it anymore. I'm sorry.
Okay. It's okay.
Sorry.
All right, I think we're good. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so exploring desires. So Scarlettine has a really good inventory checklist. I'm not going to click on it right now, but if you look up Scarlettine sexual inventory stock list, or just go to their website, it's pretty easy to find. And it lists everything from really basic like types of touch that you might enjoy or you don't enjoy. And you and your partners can fill this out together or independently and then look over it together if lists are something that are really helpful to you. There's also a really cool resource called Kink Academy. It is, I believe, an actual like paid service, but I'm pretty sure that they have like tiers of membership. But the thing that's really cool about Kink Academy is it teaches you so much about if you have specific kinks or fetishes that we'll talk about in just a minute. You can actually go to their website and they'll teach you so much about safety, consent, good communication during certain types of kinks. Okay, so I'm going to mention that and I'll say, so to define kinks and fetishes. So kinks and fetishes both are usually referred to whenever a person has sexual arousal through the inclusion of a particular object, fantasy, behavior, or sensation during sex. A lot of times definitions of kinks and fetishes will say that it's outside. These are sexual arousing situations or objects that are outside the norm of human sexuality. I don't include that just because I have no idea what's normal, and that seems such a weird way to define sexuality. But so I'll give examples. So somebody might, for example, have a shoe fetish. So they really like to make sure that shoes are somehow involved in sex for them. Or somebody might have a leather kink where they really enjoy wearing leather clothing or their partner's wearing leather clothing during sex. Typically, the way that these are differentiated is fetish usually refers specifically to something that is necessary for sexual fulfillment for a person. So if somebody has a shoe fetish, that means they really don't find sex sexually fulfilling unless shoes are involved in the way that they find arousing. It doesn't mean that that's all that sex can include, but that it should include their fetish in some way. Kinks are typically more broad, so it means they are experiences, sensations, or objects that add something to a sexual experience. And a lot of times you'll actually find kinky communities forming around specific kinks. And that might be so that people can get together just socially who have a similar interest. Some people will also have like sex education through these types of kink communities. Probably if anybody's been involved in kink communities before, probably you've used FetLife, F-E-T Life. It's kind of like the original social media website for folks who are kinky and trying to meet other folks who are also kinky. I know community members have really intense feelings about FetLife depending on what subset of the community you're in, so I'm not endorsing FetLife or saying you should go to it, but just that it is a very large kind of starting point for a lot of folks who experience different kinks to meet other folks. That's all. So again, if to think about certain kinks, for example, someone might have an airplay kink, which refers to whenever they find it sexually arousing to limit somebody's ability to breathe, or for themselves to be limited in their ability to breathe. You can imagine, just by me saying that there's a lot of potential safety concerns with airplay. And so for certain kinks, there might be really specific safety measures that are really important to consider before trying them out. And so places like Kink Academy or FetLife might be really great resources to use to make sure that you are educated about possible risks and safety concerns before engaging in different kinks.
I think it's also important for folks, especially with visible disabilities, to be aware when you're entering kinky spaces or fetish-based spaces. There is a really high chance, especially for folks who are very visibly disabled, that you will be fetishized and that your disability will be a kink. There's an entire subset of the community called devotees that have kinks and fetishes centered on disability. So it's a really, really important thing to be aware of if you're going to enter into a physical or virtual space. If people are approaching you and you just get a really weird vibe, or someone touches your mobility aid or sends you a really gross message about your disability or your mobility aid, that is unfortunately a part of navigating these spaces as people who are not able to pass as able-bodied. And it's just something to be aware of as far as risks in considering entering spaces like FetLife or dungeons.
Yeah, and also I just want to point out that that experience is not just something that people with disabilities experience, but there's often fetishization of many marginalized folks, like trans communities. I'm not going to go into the language, but we actually have specific words to talk about whenever there are people who fetishize trans folks or intersex bodies. And so I'm sure also, like, probably one of the more common ways that people might have seen this is whenever people will say that in a dating app, like, they refuse to date people who are Black, or different kinds of racialized, I mean, basically racism in the context of sexuality is really common. So in a similar way, people with disabilities often might experience different types of ableism in these types of communities as well. We wanted to make sure that we incorporate a little bit of conversation around incorporating trauma healing into sexuality. So a really basic thing might be just trying to figure out what are a person's sexual triggers. A lot of times, like, just imagining how frequently have any of us had a partner who actually asked you this in advance. Is probably pretty rare, but it would be really cool if people started making the effort to say, hey, is there something that's really upsetting for you in sexual situations? Or is there something that is so overwhelming to you during sex that it makes you shut down? You know, just asking really basic questions about kind of the more difficult situations you might experience during sex. And then a lot of times, because it's so rare to even be asked about these things, you might not have an answer or know how to respond yet. So that's why it can be really valuable in advance just to talk about, you know, if you do get really overwhelmed, or you do experience shutting down or not being able to be very responsive because you get really triggered, you know, what do you want your partner to do in those situations that will help? Maybe helping for you means stopping everything and being left alone. Maybe that means them just like holding you. You know, there's so many different ways that somebody might respond. And so it's really good to have those conversations in advance. Something that I actually probably heard the first time for myself, this was talking about how sexuality in itself can also be trauma healing. I probably heard the first time by an amazing sex educator named Ignacio Rivera. They are an educator through the Just Beginnings Collaborative, and I highly recommend you check out their work. But I wanted to mention that oftentimes in conversations I've seen about safer sex and healthy sexuality, there's this assumption that you can only have healthy sex or pleasurable sex if you've suddenly magically healed from trauma. And because trauma healing is such a lifelong ongoing process, I think that that's so unfair, because it says that implicitly survivors can't have fulfilling sexuality. And so I want to challenge that and just say sex itself can be used for trauma healing. For example, if someone experienced trauma where they didn't have control in a sexual situation, maybe their initial response to being submissive, so that's what DS, dominant submissive relationship, stands for, maybe to them being submissive has the added layer of having physical sensations of being submissive feel really similar to an assault they experienced. But if they have a trusting partner where they have the power to say no, stop, slow down, I like this, I don't like this, if they have that option and that agency in that situation, maybe being a submissive can actually be trauma healing for them to integrate that experience. It's just a random example. And then also thinking, like, very often whenever we're talking about experiencing pleasure during sex, that oftentimes we're not actually talking about like what do those things feel like in the body. It would be, I think, really enlightening to many people to actually stop and think, oh, you know, you might think, oh, this sexual experience feels really good. What feels good about it, right? And trying to figure out like where in our bodies are we actually experiencing pleasure, what things might feel uncomfortable, but it's not a big deal because everything else feels good. Kind of taking time to have precision in the sensation of pleasure, I think, is something that could really support trauma healing for a lot of folks. And then the last thing I wanted to mention in terms of trauma healing is realizing that it's almost inevitable for any of us at any point in time to accidentally cause harm to partners in a sexual situation. Very often, even in violence prevention, people act like or talk about sex and sexual harm as if there are only survivors and perpetrators and no gray space. But in reality, it's very easy and very common to accidentally make mistakes and overstep boundaries or misunderstand something, or for there to be miscommunication. It's really common for people to accidentally hurt partners. And I think part of trauma healing and even prevention work has to be talking about how are we going to incorporate accountability into sexuality preemptively. So some examples I thought of for common forms of accidental or unintentional harm might be staying in a position too long, forgetting to check in the moment, disregarding or forgetting a boundary because of whatever you're experiencing with that partner, falling asleep. I can't tell you how many times people have contacted me because they get upset that their partner falls asleep and they feel scared to ask the partner if the person got bored or something. You know, usually falling asleep is just actually a response to the body experiencing endorphins, maybe from an orgasm, but people get really scared to talk about it. And maybe falling asleep was hurtful because that person feels neglected. But it's okay sometimes, like, people make mistakes. Your body has experiences that sometimes you don't feel fully in control of. So just realizing, oh, if I experience an orgasm, maybe I know I'm going to fall asleep, so I'm going to wait until we're done doing whatever we want to do before I experience an orgasm, so that I know if I fall asleep, my partner's okay with it. So just having those opportunities to talk about common mistakes. Accidentally using triggering words or sensations, sexualizing something inappropriately. This is something really common among, I would say, trans people that I've talked with about sex, is that sometimes because sexuality is often so stigmatized even within trans communities, that everyone assumes that their own relationship to their body is the relationship other trans folks have to their body as well. Do you mind going back one? Sorry. So for example, for somebody, maybe having a prosthetic penis is not a sexual experience at all. To them, it's just like completion of their body. But to another person, having a prosthetic penis might be a very sexual experience. So just realizing that, you know, it's okay, like it happens that we make mistakes and misunderstanding how other people experience themselves, their body, their sex. And then I also want to mention laughing at moments of vulnerability. It's really common if sex just gets awkward or something happens that's unexpected. Some people laugh to that, and another person might feel like that's a really vulnerable moment, and you know, laughing maybe feels like an insult to them. So just realizing that, like, our responses to sex and awkwardness and clumsiness, all of these things that happen during sex can be really individual, and having time and space to talk with each other about, if something does feel hurtful, how are we going to talk about it ahead of time? How are we going to, stop the sexual interaction so we can talk about the harm, and just making sure that that harm doesn't happen again. You want to do this one?
I'm more or less neurotypical. I don't feel super comfy.
Okay. So this was a slide originally created by Em and their friend Lane Banister, right? Lane and Em created a lot of this PowerPoint, and I added to it. So this was one of their previous original slides that they created together. So considerations for neurodivergent partners. So one of the things they mentioned is sensory processing. So just checking in about, like, are we okay in this particular room given the lights and sounds? Do people want music or not? The level or pressure of sensitivity around touch can be really important to some people. This can probably be best highlighted in non-sexual situations with how intensely people feel about ASMR. I don't even know what that stands for, but ASMR is where people like whisper on YouTube videos, and some people find that delightful. I find it very unsettling. Clearly the three of us in the room do not like ASMR. But similarly, people have really different experiences to sensations and pressure sensitivity. So just having those kinds of discussions ahead of time. And also thinking about neurodivergence in terms of like mood disorders. So what does consent look like if someone's experiencing a depressive episode or a manic episode? How different might sex look like if somebody is going through a period of lower sex drive or more intense sex drive? How important is cuddling to people during sex? You know, maybe especially like during depressive episodes, somebody might need more time for their body to respond to physical sensation, to get aroused, to be interested in different types of sexual experiences. So realizing that like consent is not just like a one and done. You perpetually kind of want to check in with yourself and partners before and during and after different types of sexual experiences.
Another point that we've talked about in our original presentation was talking to the partner or partners about if there are times or situations where you feel like you can't consent. The example that was used there was during a manic episode is that some people may feel super comfortable, like, yes, I do always want sex, I can always consent, like I'm comfortable giving that blanket, and some people might be like, might not feel comfortable with that and might tell their partner or partners that, hey, if I'm manic, or I tell you I'm manic, or you know I'm manic, like we can't have sex, I can't make informed, safe decisions about my body in that space. So having those conversations when you aren't in those spaces is really, really important. Okay, so talking about sex with your doctor might be a super normal thing for you. You might kind of roll your eyes, and for some people, this might be something that seems completely unreasonable outside of maybe your annual visit to your GYN. But for folks with disabilities, it is a part of your health. Your sexual health is a part of your health, so your doctor does have to be able to handle that. If you live in a more rural or conservative area or see a more conservative provider, there might be some pushback about this, but you can be brave and you can be insistent. This isn't something they can ignore. You couldn't come in and be like, hey, I can't feed myself anymore because I can't have my food. Like, you can't be like, oh, that's not my problem. Like, that's not essential for life. Like, if you want sex to be a part of your life, then your doctor needs to be able to handle that. And if not, then trusting in abundance of providers and trusting that there are other folks out there that you can talk to. And it might not be your GYN. Maybe your GYN really doesn't think that this is their problem. And maybe you have to take that to one of your specialists or your PCP. It's okay to have to try a couple of different providers, and that might be really, really scary if you've had a negative reaction to one provider to think about going to another provider and potentially having that experience again. But it's really, really important to have these discussions, especially for folks who are in minority groups or who aren't straight cis men, because generally in studies that have been done looking at the response to paralysis, especially for paras and quads, and providers' response to sex and questions from people about sex and whether that's a thing that they even address, pretty much the only patients that were consistently getting the issue of can I have sex and how can I have sex addressed are straight white cis men. So for folks who aren't in that group, it's important for us to be insistent that no, this is important. Just because I'm not the person who's portrayed in the media as always wanting to have sex, or from the group that always wants to have sex, doesn't mean that this isn't important to me, and kind of pushing back on them about that.
Can you say what a PCP is?
Primary care provider, sorry. Yeah, and so I covered a lot of this already. So doctors are humans. Some of them don't have the right information or have really harmful beliefs about people with disabilities and sex, or just sex in general. We're all in Indiana. It's a pretty conservative state. I've had providers straight up tell me that I shouldn't be having sex if I'm not married, as a response to questions about sex. So like, you're gonna run into that. But don't accept that's not important right now, or I'm not having that discussion. You can fire the doctor. I know that for folks who live in more rural areas or who have very, very rare disorders, this is a really, really challenging thing. So that might not always be an option, but ask the nurse. If the doctor doesn't have answers, you can ask the nurse. Consult other folks with disabilities. There are a lot of really, really awesome Facebook groups are my personal favorite, and they're actually, even for a lot of the rare disorders, sex-specific disorder groups. So you can type in the name of your disorder and then just sex, or ask in the main group for your disorder, hey, is there an 18+ group, or is there a sex group where I can go with these questions, or just go to scroll through posts and questions that other people might have to get some answers about this. And then just trust your body. If something doesn't feel right, or you don't feel comfortable doing something, then don't do it, or find ways to do it that do feel comfortable for you.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
I just want to add, you know, sometimes it's like I mentioned, maybe it's not that the provider doesn't want to be supportive or informative, but they themselves maybe aren't informed. I've experienced doctors before, like whenever I was a teenager, the first time I came out to a doctor, they perceived me as a woman and they thought that I was only dating women. And so they flat out told me that that meant that I could not experience any type of STIs, sexually transmitted infections. And they told me it was great because it meant I would be a virgin forever, and they sent me away from their office. So I actually went to college thinking, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about sexually transmitted infections. And, you know, that there wasn't any necessary things I had to do to practice safer sex. That happens, I think, disproportionately to a lot of LGBTQ folks, where doctors may not be informed about safer sex and healthy sexuality for LGBTQ folks. And like Em mentioned, this is also sometimes an issue for people with disabilities. So it is important to realize that sometimes doctors are well-intentioned, but their impact can be very harmful. So it's important to realize, you know, that you have a right to have information about your body that's accurate, and that if you do not have a medical provider who you have found who can provide you with that information, that there are also many providers who are happy to do distance education or distance support, you know, where they might do like a web chat with you for education. There's also, like Em mentioned, an increasing number of really cool people who are people with disabilities who also have education that you can access on YouTube or different types of social media platforms.
Always fact-checking out there.
Yes,
As much as I shit on WebMD, it's actually really helpful. Okay. So like I mentioned earlier, PCAs are personal care attendants. They are folks who usually are coming into your home to help with your activities of daily living. And this can range from anything from helping you make food to helping you run and get groceries or whatever errands you want. And if you want sex to be a part of your life, then it is their job to facilitate that. And if they aren't willing to, then it's your right to look for other PCAs or caregivers to help with this. We had a lot of really interesting questions at our last presentation around this and around how to find PCAs that are comfortable with this and how to make sure that we aren't blurring the line between like consent and the professional relationship with a PCA. I think a lot of that comes down to communicating and having really open conversations when you are in the process of hiring PCA. I know that there is someone who is local to me, who I'm close to, who is a queer woman, and sex is a very, very important thing for her. It is something that she needs her PCAs to help her facilitate. And so when she posts looking for PCA, she posts as a part of her bio, I am a queer woman. A part of your tasks every day will be helping me make sure that like I can have sex independently. This does not mean that I want you to have sex with me. It might just mean that I need you to help me need you to help me get in bed naked and put a vibrator on my thigh, and if it falls off, then I can hit the page button and you will come back in and put it on my thigh. If you want to have a video recorder up during that to make sure that there's no accusations between you and the PCA, that might be a really, really great security method. That's actually something that I do whenever I'm interacting with any sort of caregiver, whether it be in home nursing, doctor's offices, even in appointments. A lot of times I will just let them know at the beginning of the appointment, hey, I'm filming this, hey, I'm recording this, just so that there isn't any of that chance for accusation. And another point I wanted to bring up with caregivers, if your primary caregiver is your family member, they might be comfortable helping you. That's awesome. I also know that my family of origin caregivers that I used growing up would not have been at all comfortable with this. If they're not and you're a legal adult, even if you don't use a PCA for other things, you can have a PCA come in to help you shower and help you have sex. And sex surrogacy is also a really, really awesome avenue for folks who have the financial means too. Sex surrogacy is a form of sex work in the United States that is legal. It is an itty bitty tiny loophole where full service sex workers, meaning somebody who will do anything on the range of sexual behaviors, gets trained through a certified institution or organization. Most of the ones currently are in Texas for some odd reason. But they get certified through that organization and then are legally able to have sex and be paid for sex with people with disabilities. Only with people with disabilities. Yeah, it's a really strange loophole you will see in some European countries where you can actually get sex workers paid for as a person with physical disabilities, which is really awesome because sex is a part of most people or a lot of people's like needs. It is not a desire, it is a need for a lot of people. And a lot of European countries are starting to recognize that. It's not recognized in the US, so sex surrogacy is a massive financial privilege because it is not cheap, but it is an option that folks have if that is something that you need or want. Sorry for that little rabbit hole.
That's so good. The rabbit holes are great.
Do you want to talk about teachers?
Yes. So this is the one that usually gets the most raised eyebrows. Why would I talk to my teacher about sex? Why would I talk to my kid's teacher about sex? That's weird. If you look at a lot of schools, K-12 schools, it is the norm for students with disabilities, physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, pretty much anyone who has an individualized education plan or a 504 through the state to be pulled out of their classes during sex education for supplemental instruction, whether this be with their special education teacher, whether this be with physical therapy or occupational therapy. It is not deemed as important enough for these students to be in these classrooms learning with their peers about sex and sexual health, which is underwritten by so many messages about these kids won't be having sex, these kids aren't having sex. If these kids are having sex, then it's not risky, or the risks that they're taking are ones that they deserve. And it's why we see such high prevalence of just entire misinformation around these communities, as well as entirely othering these students from their peers, because if you're getting pulled out of a class that is key to your instruction and your development, that sends messages to your peers, it sends messages to you about, oh, if they're not teaching me about sex, I shouldn't be having sex. So there are just all of these issues. And if you're a parent of a student with disabilities or with an IEP, they won't necessarily tell you that they are pulling out your kids. I have a parent that works in special education. They do not, their school does not inform the parents of their students that their students are not receiving this education, because it is a part of what they agree to when they agree to supplemental education as a part of their individualized education program or their 504. So going in and being very, very specific in your IEP or 504 meetings, or even at this point in the semester, emailing your professor or emailing the principal or your student's teacher or your children's teachers and saying, hey, I just wanted to bring this up. it is really important for me that my student is in the sex education classes. I want my student to be well aware about sex and sexuality and to receive the same information as their peers. If they need to be pulled out of classes, pull them out of other classes. But this isn't something that students with disabilities should be forced to miss. And it is your job to advocate for your child and to make sure that they get both this education from sex ed, and as we said earlier, sex ed is not comprehensive. It is especially not comprehensive in abstinence-only states, meaning students are only taught about abstinence. So it's important for you to learn how to have these conversations at home, as well as making sure that your student or child isn't being pulled out at school. So having conversations about what sex for them might look like with their disability, or if you're not comfortable with that, talking to their provider about, hey, you can call ahead to their appointment. Hey, can you have a 5-minute conversation at the end of our appointment with my child about what sex could look like with their disability, to just make sure that they're getting comprehensive education that includes them and their body, where they can feel seen.
Okay, so I wanted to take a few minutes for us to be able to talk about some really cool technology and resources that exist. So first off, there are several really cool safer sex apps that exist. There's one called Safer Sex Tips, and this is more of a Q&A style format. There is an app called Sex Positive, which I've included a photo of here. It's really neat because it actually gives you two different circles, and you can alter which circles are like, sorry, I'm going to try that again. There's words on each circle that there's words in each circle that are different body parts or different common toys or additives that are used in sex. Both circles have exactly the same words, but you can spin them so that different words line up with different words. The photo example that I have here shows somebody asking, when my vagina comes in contact with somebody else's finger, and then there's 3 different things that somebody can explore in regards to that prompt. They can look at STI risks that are common for those interactions. They can look at safer sex practices, and then they can also look at a section about communication and advice. This is like one of the coolest safer sex apps I've ever seen, and it's been around for a long time, and a lot of people just don't know that it exists. So I highly recommend it. It's so fantastic. Another app that's really cool about safer sex is called Sex Ilimu, and it's actually a sign language app. So you can look up different signs and different activities using visual signing on the app. There's a ton of different kinds of relationship health apps. So there's a couple that I mentioned here called My Plan and TD411. These are to help people do safety planning. This doesn't have to only be used by people who think or know that they're in harmful relationships. This could just be for any kind of relationship, including friendships. I mentioned this as a really broad, possible, important app because, for example, I've known lots of folks who are neurodivergent or people with cognitive or developmental disabilities who may generally experience a lot more trust in their relationships and have a really hard time telling if someone is lying to them or if someone is manipulating them. And so having things laid out in an app that show you, hey, these are things that I want to keep an eye out for, and having that written out so you can go back and check, hey, do I feel like my friend did these things and was supportive today? Or do I feel like my friend did these things that I think and other people have helped me realize are harmful today? So My Plan and TD411 are really cool safety planning apps. I also learned from I just got to present at the National Sexual Violence and Dating Violence Prevention Puzzles Conference. I'm sorry, I totally misremembered their name, but you just call it the Puzzles Conference. They had a really cool presenter who brought up this app called Abused Emoji. And it's a way to communicate visually if a harm has happened. And I actually have a photo from that app from their front page. And it has a text message stream, and one person says, oh, I can't come tonight, and their friend says, why, what happened? And then they just respond back with an emoji of a dark-skinned person with a Band-Aid on their face, indicating maybe some kind of harm happened to them. And the person responds and says, oh, not again, was that your dad? and it shows a picture of a dad and a younger kid, and there's like a wine glass, so maybe suggesting that that parent was drinking too much, and that's what led to the harm. And their friend says, oh, this has to stop. And so for some people who maybe need more visual forms of communication, this can be a really good way to start helping them identify if harm is happening, and maybe communicating if harm is happening. Respect Effect just helps with healthy relationship coaching. Sometimes they'll give you like little challenges to help improve respect and healthy communication in relationships. Love Smart is an app that actually is more about supporting people in doing self-reflection on identifying relationship needs and boundaries. Tit for Tat is a really cool app that it's actually helps you divide up home tasks, like domestic tasks you might be doing, and it helps you create to-do lists within the relationship together, and then you kind of like get points as you each do the things that you said that you would like to do. So maybe if you're someone who like really wants to put more effort into your relationship, and but you are very externally motivated, you can now get points for doing the dishes. That is something that helps you. I find this app kind of funny because I have talked to so many people who will say cleaning is sexy, you know, it's just like mostly like they really want their partner to put more effort. So this is just an app that can help facilitate that. I didn't want to leave out cuddle positions. This isn't like an overtly sexual app, but I think that cuddling is often an underrated part of like affection and sensuality in relationships. So there's literally an app that can just give you ideas for different cuddle positions. Circle of Six, Kite String, and there's a ton of other apps in this category that are actually about dating safety. They help you maybe put certain people in that app, and you can schedule dates in the app. Not with other people, it's like an internal calendar for your phone that says, hey, I'm going to go on a date at 6 p.m. on this day. And you can set it in the app so that if you don't check in with somebody in like an hour, that it will send a message to the people that you put into the app. In order to do that, of course, you have to talk ahead of time to friends, the people that you want as your safety contacts, and say, hey, if this app reaches out to you, I want you to call me. Or another situation, somebody might say, hey, if I put you in this app and you can't reach me by this certain time when the app texts you, I need you to call the police. Something like that. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in what you actually want to happen. And then I haven't explored this app a lot, but I just wanted to let people know it exists. There's an app called Reboot that's supposed to be helping people with porn addiction. So it exists. So sorry, I can't give you a lot of information. I haven't like used it or checked out how it works very much.
Can you ask people if they can hear you? So I'm getting conflicting sound information.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us
there
okay?
Other people who can't hear. Yeah.
Okay.
People can.
Okay. There's also lots of apps that I wanted to mention can do really cool stuff for actual partners. So most of these apps, the way that they work, or at least I'll say the first 3 bullet points of apps, the way they work is you and your partner both join the app and connect as partners in the app. So the app knows, hey, this person and this person are partners. And then it will actually let you go through a series of questions where it'll ask you, oh, are you into being tied down? And you might say yes or maybe. And then it'll ask your partner, and your partner might say maybe. And so you both know, oh, okay, you have a similarity in interest in this specific thing. And so like if you're somebody who feels really awkward about talking about sex, maybe if verbal conversation is just too quick to process in the moment, like if that feels like a lot of pressure, or if you just want to try out different apps, these can be really helpful in communicating about sexual desires and boundaries if verbal communication or other types of communication feel to like just don't work for you very well. So examples of those specifically are Kindu, Desire, Spicer, and then the Gottman card decks is actually like, it's literally like a set of card decks. You can kind of go through the different questions. Intertwine is more geared towards like giving you different ideas about things that you might be interested in trying. This can be helpful. Like I know a lot of people, especially if they're in longer term relationships, feel like maybe they're bored with their sex life, but they don't know how to, you know, change things around. So that app just kind of helps give you different ideas depending on your own preferences. And then Coral is the app I actually have a photo of that I like randomly filled in a bunch of stuff to see what it looks like. I want to give props to Coral because they are like trying to be trans inclusive. So I feel like they could do things a little bit differently, but this is what they have laid out right now. They can let you select if you are a man, woman, or other, and then if you click other, it opens and you can say you're either trans masculine or trans feminine. I actually found if I just clicked other and I didn't specify, it would still register me as a trans person and I didn't have to like be masculine or feminine, which is pretty cool. And then you can just, give it different information about your age, what types of genders you're into, whether or not you're in a relationship, if you're here just for additional pleasure, or if you're here because you're experiencing sexual problems, you can tell it that. And then it will help you do kind of a semi-personalized sex coaching. And then lastly, there's a ton of different apps that just exist to show people different positions. I will say that generally sex position education apps most of the time do not include education and support for people with disabilities, especially like mobility disabilities, or if you're using an assistive device, there's not going to be a lot of photos of people reflected in that way. And also most of the time the photos are going to be like the stereotyped icons of men and women together. So they tend to be like pretty overtly like heterosexual. But there is still a lot of information you can get from them that you can extrapolate to your own life and your own needs. Yeah. And then I want to mention there's a few apps that are pretty specific just to helping people explore sexual pleasure. Very often, in safer sex conversations, there's not a lot of conversation about pleasure. It's really just about like the basics of safety and risk reduction. So I want to mention that there are an increasing number of apps that are being created for the point of just helping people explore sexual pleasure. Rosie is one that seems to mostly be made for cisgender straight women, but it seems to be like kind of the most comprehensive sexual pleasure geared app that I've found. And it does a lot of coaching and support. Lovely, I believe, is specifically an app that you can use to kind of Bluetooth connect different sex toys to, and it can help maybe like if you want your partner to be able to control different sex toys. I believe that that's what that app does. Tease Me, it sounds like it would be what Lovely is, but actually what Tease Me is this really interesting platform that people have created to share different types of sexual fantasies and stories. This might be something that someone might find a way to kind of explore if they are into certain types of sexuality without having to try them out physically. It might also just be a way for you and partners to connect about different interests, or an opening for you to have conversations about sexual pleasure with a partner. And then My Sex is actually kind of pretty literally a calendaring app. But I think it's kind of interesting because some people actually have like a really deliberate like plan for how frequently they want to experience sex, or how maybe if you're somebody with multiple partners and you want to figure out which days belong to which partners, this can be really helpful. So I just want to mention there's like specifically a calendaring app for sexuality that people might find useful.
Google Calendar is also useful.
Yes, Google Calendar is also useful.
Just calling people.
Yes. Okay, do you want to do this one?
Yeah. So in pulling together resources or just this presentation in general, I happened across a lot of different just cool stuff that's closely related but was not quite close enough to like make an actual slide. So I'm super into Twitter. Twitter is a super disability friendly platform as a whole, and there are a lot of really amazing radical disability activists on that platform. So a couple of my favorite hashtags for Twitter, because that is the way that their search engine operates, are hashtag disabled people are hot, hashtag crip sex, CRIP sex, and hashtag disabled sex. There's a lot of really awesome information and photos and things like that tagged under there. Crip sex, I don't think it'll let you in unless you're over 18 to that hashtag. Some of them are barred age-wise, depending on how your Twitter is set up. So just a heads up for, I don't think there are any folks on here that are under 18, but if you're sharing this with folks that are under 18, just be aware. Activists that are doing this work that are super awesome. Andrew Gurza has a really amazing podcast called Disability After Dark. He does not currently have, it's not currently transcribed, so it's not super accessible for deaf or hard of hearing folks. It is something that he's actively working on. But he is a queer, kinky man who has a mobility related disability. And then Queer Sex Ed is another podcast. They are not disability specific. It's a podcast run by two queer people, but they are both disabled, and they have a lot of great content on their disability, and it's kind of created for these communities, by these communities. So it's a really, really awesome comprehensive resource. And then I shot some Instagrams down there that do a mix of queer sex and disabled sex and just sex stuff in general. So at Shrimp Teeth has some really cute little comic type art stuff that's a lot of fun. At Cripping Up Sex, they have some really awesome weekly tips that come up as far as like, hey, maybe you should think about this week. It's just fun to kind of get your mind rolling on things. At the Andrew Gerza, I think he might have just changed his Instagram last week, so don't quote me there. If you can't find him, try Twitter. And then at salty.world is just a very, very broad page. It's run by some leftist feminist folks that has great information as far as just minority communities in general, and they are radically sex positive and just absolutely wonderful. I know they've had some issues with Sesta Pasta type shadow banning on Instagram, so you may or may not be able to find them depending on whether or not they are currently shadow banned.
I have a comment to share with you both. Sarah writes, should I turn the?
Okay, Sarah writes _ang host, ANG host, writes comics and is making a quick and easy guide to sex and disability, and it might be the same person.
So it's not the same person, but everything that is written by that little group of humans is absolutely magical. Yes, lovely. I just purchased several of their books. Their disability guide to sex is not out until sometime later this summer, spring. I don't know, it's pre-ordered. It'll show up.
Can you go to the next slide?
Yes. And so this was kind of, when Lane and I originally created this presentation, we sat down and had a discussion about what do we want our takeaway point to be? What do we want the core of the work that we were doing for that presentation to be? And this was kind of the phrase that we kept coming back to and in that conversation, and all of our conversations around that. So we just kind of wanted to leave you with being a person with a disability does not mean that you're not able to be a sexual person. So, all right.
Can we go on to questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. So do folks have any questions about the content we discussed today?
No, they haven't written anything yet. Oh, here we go. What is the name of the support device on slide 12? Let's go back to slide 12. Let's look at this together. Do you remember off the top of your head, Em?
So the wedge is one. Oh, it should be in the image descriptions.
Oh, okay.
So
It's right there.
yeah, so the cover and the original are from Fascinator. Oh, yeah, no, I do not know off the top of my head for that one.
What did you call this though?
I can probably pull it back up in my Google. That would have been mobility assistive devices for sex was what I Googled, and it was in the first 15 images when I pulled it up on Google Image. So it should be fairly easy to find. I did not go more than one full page in to find any of these images.
Does that help?
Yeah, and if that does not help,
Okay.
then feel free to grab my email, and you guys can email me for stuff, because I have links to all of this. It's just on a separate Google Doc.
Okay. What about, thank you.
Yeah.
What about
do you think health insurance would cover sexual assisted devices? And then what would you recommend if it didn't?
They don't at all, unfortunately. So this is kind of a tricky spot to be in as far as this being a need for a lot of people and a lot of this not being accessible. Like I said, how I've mitigated this and how a lot of other folks with disabilities that I know have kind of navigated this has been DIYing a lot of this stuff. So the slide that we're on now, I honestly probably would not buy that. I would go get PVC pipe from Lowe's. And I have a partner who has a circular saw, or a sweetie has a circular saw. And I would circular saw that. And then I would use PVC glue. And I would probably spray the whole thing with some sort of water resistant barrier. And then I would get thick straps of plastic from Joann's. That would probably cover me $15. The only thing that I buy and pay money for are things that I am putting in my body without a cover. And with that, you're going to want to make sure that you have good silicone stuff. So it's good. That stuff's going to run you $50 to $100, unfortunately. As far as adaptive equipment, DIY it, buy a $20 wedge foam from Amazon and throw even like puppy pads. You can get extra large puppy pads from Petco. It's like $8 for a big container. Those are totally waterproof and they're soft, so they don't suck like tarps. Versus chucks, which are what are water resistant, individual use pieces of plastic with cloth on top of them. Those are about $25 to $40 for a pack of 10 puppy pads. So a lot of it will come down to just being really, really creative. Google or Twitter pervertables, PERVERTABLES. That's going to be a lot of examples of things that people have taken the everyday objects that they've turned into or perverted into sex objects or sex toys. It is an actual word that is used a lot in the kink community because honestly, a lot of the kinky, especially kinky queer folks I know, are young and poor as hell. So get creative. Like, that's my best answer for you.
I just wanted to share with us that some people are checking out these apps and the Instagrams and things, and Limu is in Kenyan sign language. So it is not for American Sign Language. So just FYI for all of us. And then this is a question that you will not be able to answer in the 2 minutes that we have left, but I'm still going to ask it because yes. And so that is, what recommendations would you have for creating a disability inclusive sexual health curriculum for use in schools? And so I'm picking up that this person is talking about K through 12.
Talk to people with disabilities that are already doing this work. Reach out to us, pay us. The amount of labor that I have been asked to do by organizations run by generally white cisgender able-bodied heterosexual folks who come to me and ask me to do massive amounts of labor, not realizing that I am a full-time student with 2 jobs. It's ridiculous. So hire folks with disabilities who are already doing sex work or sex health work to come in and do this. Don't ask your disabled second cousin. They won't have the information. That happens though. The number of people with disabilities that have come to me and they're like, how am I the expert on this? So ask us, pay us.
And if you're really new to talking about sexuality and disability, you can start off by just looking at on social media some of the people that we've recommended, and you'll find that people who are already doing this work are also connected to a lot of other folks who are doing that work, probably in your area. So it's not super difficult to find people who are sex educators and have disabilities who can give you a lot of really important information for your area just by looking on social media.
And do you mind if I turn my mic back on real quick to close us? I just wanted to say thank you for Cierra. If I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong, for letting us know that on that stool on the right side is called a sex stool or an adjustable sex chair. and it's available from Kinkly on Amazon.com. Okay, so I am going to take us back to the end. We are wrapping up here, and I just want to point out some resources that I have that Skye and I and the Abuse Prevention Disability Task Force have available for folks out there if you're interested. All of the following information is available in a handout in your little handouts pane, but I just want to draw your attention to the online resource hub that we have. It is increasingly becoming more and more full of wonderful, accessible information created by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. If you're interested in the webinar series that we did last year, we have a YouTube channel that you can visit, and in the handout, all of these URLs are active. This year, we brought to you 3 different webinars about different subjects, and including the one today, and there are the links there if you'd like to check them out if you haven't already heard them. We are we've postponed one of the webinars that we had set up because our colleague became very ill with an infection and actually had to have one of his legs amputated, and so he is in recovery right now, and I want to encourage people to continue to register for that webinar. It's amazing. It completely reorganized some of the things that I was thinking about in my brain, and I think that I am smarter now, having and just really understand disability justice a little bit better as a primary preventionist after that webinar. So I really encourage you to sign up for that. It is TBD. If you sign up for it, it means that the date is to be determined. Right now it says sometime in March, but that's a total lie. Just sign up for it and I'll let you know what's going on there. And finally, I will include Em's contact information in this if Em is comfortable with sharing that. This is Skye and my contact information. We're so happy to have you with us today, and just stay tuned because we'll have more coming your way sometime very soon. And this is the funding disclaimer. We could not do what we do without this funding, or at least not as effectively. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you and hear from you again soon. Bye. Yes. Oh.